Hello there, you big sexy lizardfish. Andy Murray here for WhatCulture Wrestling, and when we talk about WWE and bad habits, it tends to take an absolute ice age because there's a continent's worth of ground to cover, there's just loads of bad habits basically, and everyone's got a different take. We could talk about Vince McMahon and his unending dedication to ropey, misfiring comedy that rarely seems to hit the mark. Or we could talk about how the old man seems barely capable of pushing more than a handful of wrestlers at once without making everyone else look like mid-carders. We could talk about 50-50 booking, or that old chestnut WWE's refusal to listen to their audience. But we're not going to do that today. We're going to go down a completely different road. So this, dear viewers, is the one habit of a lifetime that WWE needs to break. With the major upheaval that has gone on in WWE's developmental system, the past decade has seen something of a paradigm shift with WWE's pious recruitment model. Now, a number of things have contributed to this, and they include, but aren't restricted to, Daniel Bryan's organic and natural rise to the top of the card prior to WrestleMania 30, the demand for accelerated professional wrestling in general, and of course the failure of the old, dilapidated WWE developmental system. With FCW, WWE had for the longest time, in the words of Daniel Bryan on the original NXT, failed to make their own guys. Elsewhere in the wrestling world, the hardcore darlings of the independent scene had generated so much buzz through unbridled, untethered, and unrestricted creativity that they eventually began bleeding into the WWE system themselves. Instead of being buried like Bryan was back in the day for wrestling in front of high school gyms, these men and women were now being celebrated for things like dominating Japan, which they actually did, so good. Now, WWE have tried to resist this. In 2019 alone, we saw 4 consecutive main roster pay-per-views headlined not by Finn Balor or someone who can do more than apply a chinlock and annoy the internet, but Baron Corbin. Baron Corbin. But unfortunately for them, WWE's resistance failed, and putting Corbin on top drew widespread scorn and really, really bad numbers. Humiliating numbers, even. The Corbin vs. Seth Rollins program was effectively a parody of WWE and the way they put on matches and make their own stars. Take it back to 2000 when Chris Benoit arrived, and Triple H famously damned him with faint praise after the Wolverine's first match, saying, "He's not bad, he's alright." Which is kind of funny because if you go even further back to 1994, Benoit was competing in the NJPW Super J Cup as Wild Pegasus. He won the whole damn thing, and among tape traders, who were the fortunate few that could actually get their hands on this at the time, the whole evening was put down, it went over, it was universally praised as one of the greatest nights for in-ring entertainment ever. Chris Benoit, he won that. Meanwhile, over in WCW in the very same year, what was good old Paul Levesque doing? He was trying and failing to put on a French-Canadian accent as a green little jobber. Seriously, you really need to go back and watch that footage, it's an absolute hoot. And now in 2019, after the risible flexing of 2000, Triple H willingly welcomes performers of Chris Benoit's ilk to NXT with open arms and a little selfie for his Instagram. The paradigm has shifted. We have now reached a point where if you look at the WWE roster and who's featuring in reasonably big spots throughout the card, there are significantly more former indie guys than there are ground up, from scratch NXT prospects. And yet despite all this, despite the popularity of these wrestlers when they're in NXT, WWE's main roster creative output remains very unpopular at worst and divisive at best. While WWE have gotten out of the habit of just burying anyone who made their name elsewhere on site, this has been undermined by another more troublesome, problematic and deeply entrenched mentality. Broadly speaking, WWE's in-house in-ring style operates in a very certain way. Back in the day, Jim Ross used to use one very specific word on commentary to describe the whole thing. That word is methodical, which, according to the English dictionary, means done according to a systematic or established procedure. Now, at several points, the new generation era sprinted past this, and of course, the Attitude Era gave us some wonderful, chaotic, wild, out-of-control brawls, but those are the rule-proving exceptions here, and for the most part, the average WWE match has had the same methodical sprawl for a long time. The pace compromises both performer and program alike. Let's take Jon Moxley, who for the past couple of months has been soundly embarrassing WWE, first through his awesome debut in AEW at Double or Nothing, but most recently through an incredible run in this year's New Japan G1 Climax. His match against Tomohiro Ishii was an absolute masterpiece, and it was as physical and as gladiatorial and as much of a spectacle as the best Brock Lesnar matches. Contested at New Japan's trademark unwavering pace, it was a seamless, beautiful mesh of styles, and it brought a whole new level of physicality. Take that match for just a minute, compare Moxley versus Ishii to Seth Rollins versus Dean Ambrose from WWE TLC 2018. One of these matches was framed as a deeply personal grudge feud and a blow-off match informed by years of history, while the other was effectively just an exhibition match in a tournament. But look at them side by side and tell me which one was more physical and which one was more heated. At TLC, Ambrose and Rollins wrestled a slow, methodical, and frankly dull grind of a match that, if you removed the build and made someone watch it out of context, they would never be able to tell you that these two men were supposed to hate each other. It was bloody pedestrian. In contrast, Moxley strode right up to Ishii before the bell in their match like he was the toughest son of a bitch in whatever prison yard he just walked into. He was out to prove himself to the hardest man in wrestling, the Stone Pitbull, and prove himself he did. Ishii responded with an absolutely awesome spot as he flew from the top rope and splashed Moxley through a table on the outside. Now, for those of you who maybe don't watch New Japan with any kind of regularity, for context, this is something that Ishii just doesn't do. It was a real out-of-character risk, but one that he had to take. He had to go to these extreme lengths to put Moxley away in a match that just built and built and built. But while that match built, Ambrose versus Rollins toiled. The irony of all this, of course, is that WWE and their most tribal defenders regularly tell you that that is the promotion where they tell stories, while other companies, well, they just throw a bunch of high spots together with no psychology. But Ambrose versus Rollins was tonally wrong. It toiled because the quote-unquote WWE way is antiquated. It is completely incompatible with the complexion of WWE's modern roster. And this ties in with WWE's attitude towards their audience, which we can look at cynically, practically, or both. WWE strive to hit the widest audience possible, and a byproduct of that is a broader, more simplistic form of storytelling. The first goal is comprehension, and everything else, including exhilaration, is secondary. And so WWE's producers impose this slower, grinding, more methodical style on its competitors so that you, the viewer, who they don't trust to figure anything out on your own, will understand what's going on. And the approach is as systemic as it is stubborn. It is a mentality that helped bring about WWE's worldwide dominance when Vince McMahon, to his credit, sensed a shift in that world. But today, WWE are more concerned with counter-programming than improving their own product. Now, this approach worked for a dynamic like, say, Triple H versus The Undertaker from 2010, when those guys had slowed down, physically maybe a little bit past their peak, but psychologically as tremendous as ever. Now, it didn't work for a dynamic, and in fact it really betrayed it for one like AJ Styles versus Ricochet. Consider their recent matches at Extreme Rules and SummerSlam 2019. Each had the athletic precision and ingenuity you would expect from two elite performers of their caliber, particularly in that finish at SummerSlam, the flippy-do off the top rope into the Styles Clash, which was absolutely awesome. But the pacing completely lost the audience on both counts. These were WWE's version of all those dream matches you might have concocted in your head between AJ and Ricochet over the past few years, and they didn't hit their potential because they weren't allowed to. If AJ had faced Ricochet on a takeover event in a big spotlight, then the match would absolutely have banged, but if you think about Ricochet, he really hasn't wrestled at that breakneck pace he used to do down in developmental since he hit the main roster. The guy Well, the guy just isn't over at the moment, and the cause and effect cannot be ignored. Now, some people might argue that the faster pace inhibits psychology, leading to the dreaded, "ooh, they're just spat monkeys" argument. But listen to the underdog roar of Kurikan Hall in full voice, or go back and watch any takeover event. Witness those molten hot crowds hanging on every dramatic shift. Picture the roaring comeback from a dead cell, the kind of comeback you just don't get on WWE's main roster, and all the accumulated damage to the selling wrestler that informs the drama, creating a type of match that doesn't peak, it just keeps on going. Now, wrestling psychology can be tied to logic, but broadly speaking, the best psychologists have always been those who were able to generate the loudest, most sustained reactions to their work. So pause for a second and consider, what does that say about WWE's ability to manipulate their audience in 2019? The general WWE match layout is borderline insulting to your intelligence. The face is in a rest hold, and that is supposed to encourage you to shout out and scream and chant, willing them on to overcome Baron Corbin or Randy Orton's chinlock. And it's supposed to be rousing, it's supposed to be uninspiring, but we see it several times every single week, and now it's more likely to put you and me to sleep. What WWE need to do really is embrace the in-ring banger. And now the take isn't quite as simple as, well, NXT and New Japan do it so it would work for them. Actually, come to think of it, it just might be. NXT's blistering, more complex matches continually draw more critical acclaim than almost anything on WWE's main roster pay-per-view, and now, when we get one of these big four show weekends, TakeOver routinely outdraws both Raw and SmackDown. Now, WWE doesn't need to shed its sports entertainment mentality completely. I mean, if you go to Extreme Rules and that awesome Graveyard Dogs tag, it was phenomenal, but completely unlike anything else you'll see on TakeOver. No. What they need to do is start catching up. NXT has set the pace, their crowds are absolute lava, and yet if you go to the average main roster show, more often than not, you could hear a rat piss on cotton in row Z. And that certainly wasn't the case before NXT was completely rebuilt. So, in conclusion, despite the odd Baron Corbin push, WWE, for the most part, have now acknowledged, even though they won't officially say so themselves, that the best, most developed talent is that comes around outside their machine. In order to truly recapture the imagination of this receding, disenfranchised fanbase, WWE must start allowing this generation of talent to get over on its own terms, because methodical Ricochet is an oxymoron. Because at the end of it all, what's even the point of recruiting the best talent if you won't allow them to be the best versions of themselves? Anyway guys, my take done, your take now. Head on down to the comments section below, let us know what you think, and while you're down there, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Once you've done that, you can follow us at WhatCulture WWE and myself at Andy H. Murray if you're into that kind of thing. Bye!